The Pitesti phenomenon, 1949 to 1951. However, what has not yet become universal knowledge is the fact that in the Romanian Gulag archipelago, there was an island of absolute horror, such as existed nowhere else in the entire geography of the communist penitentiary system. Pitesti Prison, Virgil Iranuka, Pitesti phenomenon, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the 1970 Nobel Prize laureate for literature, refers to the Pitesti experiment as the most terrible act of barbarism in the contemporary world. Historian François Furet, member of the French Academy, regards the Pitesti phenomenon as, quote, one of the most terrible experiments in dehumanization that our epoch has known, end quote. Between 1949 and 1951, the destruction of society's elite was almost complete. Intellectuals, diplomats, priests, officers, magistrates, policemen, and politicians of the bourgeois landowner regime were in prison. The most industrious peasants had been deported to forced labor camps. Collectively and individually, they were all labeled, quote, enemies of the people, end quote. It now remained to annihilate the unpredictable social force of youth. For the latter, the Pitesti experiment was invented, termed, quote, re-education, end quote, by the Securitate. The most barbarous methods of psychological torture were applied to recalibrate young prisoners with the object of making them reciprocally humiliate each other, physically abuse each other, and mentally torture each other. Victims were transformed into executioners. Prisoners were tortured by their own friends, by their fellows in suffering. The purpose of re-education through physical and physical destruction, the transformation of young people into atheists, into informers on their friends. Examples of psychological torture. On Easter night, prisoners who refused to make a total self-denunciation, to tell everything that they were supposed not to have declared during Securitate interrogations, are forced to take a holy communion of fecal matter. Those suspected of having concealed information about participants in anti-communist actions have their heads thrust by their torturers into chamber pots full of urine. Prisoners are forced to spit in the mouth of their anti-communist leader in order to force him to revenge himself by unmasking them. On Christmas Day, a prisoner is forced to go to stool on a bedpan to symbolize the nativity of Christ, while the other political prisoners are forced to kneel and cross themselves before him. The delirious imagination of Turcanu, he was the head of the torturers, was unleashed above all when he was dealing with students who believed in God and who strove not to renounce their belief. Thus, some of them were baptized every morning. Their heads were plunged into a bucket of urine and fecal matter, while those present chanted the rite of baptism. This went on until the contents of the bucket began to bubble. When the recalcitrant prisoner was on the point of drowning, he was pulled up, given a short respite in which to draw breath, and then submerged once again. One of those thus baptized, to whom the torture was systematically applied, acquired an automatic reflex that lasted for some 2 months. Every morning he would go and plunge his own head in the bucket, much to the amusement of the re-educators. Ultimately, the majority of those re-educated ended up by admitting that they deserved all manner of objection and that they could only be partially rehabilitated, they themselves becoming the torturers of new inmates. For the slightest hesitation, they were subjected to torture once more. The diabolical operation depersonalization and moral assassination commenced in December 1949 at the Pitesti Penitentiary and was continued at a lower intensity at the Gurla and Targu Akna penitentiaries. The Pitesti experiment is regarded as unique in the panoply of methods designed to destroy the human person.